All right. Well, first off, give me feedback if this goes up when I hit this. So my intention is to get it to a slide mode. Can you see that?
Yep, you're good.
All right, it's good. Okay, cool. All right, well, welcome to part 2 of the growth dilemma, and highly recommend this book. Ami Kassar, who acts in the capacity of director of financing for peer executive groups, wrote this book a number of years ago, and it really is not just about what you would do with $1 million if we dropped it on you, but makes you really think about your business planning, right? So are you the type of person who has aggressive growth ideas, or are you the type of person who's more conservative and maybe is a little has an aversion towards debt, right? So, the first session we had, which is up on YouTube, if you look for part 1, you can find it up there, got us this far, really talked about people who are committed to growth and others that are safety netters. And we talked a little bit about tortoise and the hare. And it was all in the discussion about, what would you do if someone was to give you $1 million? How would you use it, right? And so by the time you get halfway through the book, you're asking yourself, where am I in this business journey? Am I committed to growth? Am I not? And really, I think it's a wake-up call. The reason why Ami was so successful in being able to go around to all the peer groups and discuss this with them was because they all were like a little bit embarrassed. They didn't have really strong business plans, which then would dictate what they would do if they did get the money. So that was kind of cool. I'm just going to blow through this really quick, but there are a number of stories that Ami likes to use in each of the chapters, and we kind of outline them in part of this presentation. And we're just going to skip up through to chapter 5. It's coming up here. So where are you in your business journey? So this is where we left off last time. We pick up with chapter 6, which is what is your risk tolerance? So in this chapter, he starts the process of testing the reader on their risk tolerance. So there's a number of ways to do that. First, he identifies, a couple key things that happen when it comes to lending. So if you're borrowing money, lots of times you may have somebody approach you and say, hey, if we're lending you this money, we would want some personal guarantees. And just so you know what that means, personal guarantees means that they're kind of reaching beyond the structure of your company, beyond your C Corp or your S Corp or your LLC. And they're looking at you as the individual owner of the company and saying, you have a balance sheet too. And we want to attach our risk to you as well, which means you need to come through in case, things don't work out for your business. So
be a whole nother discussion, couldn't it?
What's that?
Personal guarantees could be a whole nother discussion.
That's right. That's right. So that's the key, I think. Welcome if you're just joining us. We are at chapter 6, and as I stated prior, we do have the previous 5 chapters covered on YouTube. Feel free to go to that to check that out as well. So personal guarantees absolutely come into play, especially if it comes to things like SBA lending and things like that. Another word that comes to into play is the concept of liens. So what they're doing is they're going to give you money in exchange for having a lien on some kind of asset of your business. So just be aware that that is normal. Typically, they want to reduce the risk of giving you the loan. And so in exchange for that, they may take a lien out. Now, if you have assets that already have liens, i.e. you finance some rental assets and they're currently you're paying down debt on them, then this would be a secondary position on the lien related to those particular assets. Very rare that banks will do that. They're looking to be first position on a lot of different assets you may have. If you have assets that are already paid off, that would be a perfect example of where they would take a first position lien. So a couple of in the beginning of the chapter, he identifies a couple of definitions, which is great. So once you start that chapter, and by the way, I read this book, I have physical copies of this book, but I also like it in Kindle. I use Google Play for book reading also, so that's where I happen to have this one. And inside of it is the risk tolerance test. And what you do is you answer a series of questions to determine whether you are risk averse, meaning, gosh, I don't like debt and I'm risk averse to it, or you're risk neutral, or you are risk flexible. So when we did this with the peer groups, we found that, you know, the majority of people are risk neutral. In other words, they really better have a good business plan if they're going to become risk flexible. If they didn't really have a business plan and or they were later in life on their business, they had a tendency to be more risk averse and not necessarily want to take that loan from the offer. So in this chapter, he also gives an example of what it means to be risk averse by giving you information about an Inc. 500 operator named Hearth Builders. And again, because of Ami's relationship with Inc., we were, you know, he's able to use a lot of examples of success stories and not so success stories that are available through small businesses on Inc. So regarding that risk tolerance, does anybody on the call know what their risk behavior is?
I say I'm fairly risk averse now, Dan.
Risk averse. Oh, is this Tony Magby?
Yes.
Who is this?
Yes, it's Tony Magby.
Of course. See how good I am at that. I can pick up on that. How about you, Charlie? Where are you at?
I'm probably averse, but I think in my business career, I was probably risk neutral. I wasn't afraid to try something new.
Yeah, and probably you were able to move from averse to neutral as you had confidence,
Yeah.
right? With whatever it is, whether it was your brother's idea or your idea, you know, you start to, as you feel more comfortable with the plan, you become more neutral and eventually you become flexible. If you say, wow, you know, for the price of this money, I could really make this thing shine. So
yeah, the guys that can get to that point where they're like looking at what they can get as a return versus all that, like that's next level then when you can get to that aspect of it, I think.
So if anybody wants, and if you're listening to this video on YouTube later in life, you know, down the road here, feel free to reach out to me at my contact information, and I'll be glad to send you that test because it is helpful to kind of say, maybe I'm a little more risk averse than I thought I might have been. So the next piece says, okay, now that we've kind of tested our natural risk aversion disposition disposition. So now what is it about our growth aspirations? So chapter 7 gets into it, and this is really where the rubber hits the road. So if you're in peer groups, you need to have this conversation inside your group, right? There are people in the room that want double-digit growth every year. How are they doing it? Right? If the industry is doing double-digit growth, well, then you're just going with the industry. But what if the industry is not going to grow and you still have a plan for double-digit growth? That is having that aspiration for growth. It means you're going to have to be more tactical with your planning around it, which that factors into, again, your use of debt, right? So in this chapter, Ami talks about stretch goals. He would like everybody to identify their goal, put it down, but then come up with stretch goals. And when you do both your normal goal setting and your stretch goal setting, try to come up with what the capital infusion might look like. So a great example of this would be peer groups. We've grown at 30% for 2 years, and then we grew to 45% the next year after that. So there's money coming in, but really we need to invest as a company if we want to continue to grow. And that means that we need a capital infusion, which will come off the balance sheet and invest in the operation of the company. And, in my mind, with a small consulting firm like this, it's probably $100 grand. It's not a big deal. When it comes to an event rental operation or a equipment rental operation, it becomes a lot more risky, right? And there's bigger numbers at stake. So a lot of it has to do with, here's our plan, this is where we're going. I think that's part of the reason why you see people embracing the traction book and the EOS model, is it has to do with the fact that, hey, I want to have a really tight business plan and where I'm headed. So the question in the chapter gets into, what level stretcher are you? So there's aggressive stretchers, there's medium stretchers, and then there's, light stretchers or whatnot. So, we have one peer group where they're pretty aggressive stretchers. All of them are looking at double-digit growth regardless of what the market says. So they have to present to each other a plan that shows how they're going to grow. So there's a lot more investing happening in those levels. In this chapter, they talk about a company called Dazity. And it's like a lifestyle type of company based out of Seattle. I don't believe they are still operational. I usually have a link here where you can click over to their website, take a look at them. But in the chapter, they talk about, how they use other people's money to basically grow their business and sell it evidently. So we'll have to see what it says about what happened to them at the end of the day. So chapter 8 gets into, should you get a loan to grow? So right now inside rental, I would say there's easily 20% or more than that, probably 30% that say, I am not going to borrow money to grow the business. Now, I might borrow money to maintain the business, because in the business of rental, you have to refresh your assets and things like that. But in terms of saying, no, we need a loan because we're going to grow, and that could be used for mergers and acquisitions where you're going out and you're acquiring another location, buying up your competitor, whatever that might be. But I would say that at least 30 to 50% are not thinking like that inside of peer groups. For the most part, they are looking at it specifically to maintain current growth rate. We look at 3 or 4 different debt ratios in the composite book, so it helps them kind of gauge where they want to be. So this just poses the question around that, and it starts you also to think about debt versus equity, right? So some people might, you have a couple of things you can offer. You can offer a lien on your assets and get some debt that you have to pay back, or you can also get money into your company in the form of equity sales. So we'll talk about that in the next chapters. So chapter 9, getting near the end of the book now. There are valuable lessons in the hunt for money. So this is a good chapter. He kind of hits the pause button and he talks about some success stories and some risk stories that are helpful to kind of gauge where you kind of look at yourself and say, which one of these am I more like? So in this particular case, he outlines a company called Skyline Attractions. I welcome you to check that out online and see what it was about their business related to this story. But it's kind of like this mindset of, do you have a designed business plan for growth? And if you do, then it makes sense to start to look at your debt options. And then at the very end of the book, there's a chapter that's committed. And this actually, you can do a whole other book on this chapter. So this chapter is focused on family business and partnerships. So everything we did in the book up to this point was really focused around you coming to some hard realities and hard decision-making about your commitment to growth versus income in your business. And when you have a family or partnership on the equity, it's that much harder, because anybody who's married knows that one of you is a little more risk taking than the other, right? I'm guessing that's the case. Tony, you got my back on that or no?
He might have fallen off.
Okay,
He's not
so
showing.
somebody has
Oh, for sure.
somebody has a risk aversion more than someone else might, right? So
Yeah.
I think that's part of what's typical in any circumstance. So the last chapter, I think this is the last chapter, gets into finding your financing comfort zone, which says it's okay to not want to take a ton of debt on. And it's also okay to be aggressive with your debt planning, if just as long as your business plans align with it. So I'll give you an example of this. Whenever we do the composite book review with a peer group, we get to balance sheet ratios. And in the balance sheet ratios, we talk about debt management, right? And the banks like to go over things like debt coverage ratios. We like to look at debt to equity, anything related to what's my debt level, what's my debt compared to my revenue, any of these things, right? So the interesting thing about this is, as a referee slash facilitator of our peer groups, we cannot endorse one position over another. We can't give you a grade. So on the performance side, we can tell you green is good and red is bad, and you have 5 greens and 2 reds. But when it comes to the balance sheet, we can't do that. It's simply a matter of your comfort with risk. So we have seen runaway trains. They have come into the peer groups and left the peer groups, and in some cases have sold their businesses. And that's because they take on debt without having the plan behind it. And so they end up on some levels overfunding and not being able to use the money productively to get the return on investment. And then we have a ton of examples of members who don't even grow at the rate of their market. So if we find out that rental operations in Chicago and in Region 5 in the American Rental Association are growing at a rate of 12%, and you're growing at 6%, that might be comfortable to you, but that essentially means you're losing market share, right? So that's where we're kind of saying, hey, in that case, you might want to step up your commitment to debt. As long as you can follow with your market, that's at least something we expect most of our members to try to do. So finding your financing comfort zone is kind of, I believe, how they wrap that up. Before we get into any more conversation, I just wanted to share that on this video, here's my email, dcrowley@peerexecutivegroups.com. If you haven't seen part 1, by all means do that. And ultimately, highly recommend that you read the book. Again, it's in every format you can find. It's a small book, but it has a lot of information in it. I think we went through about 30 to 40 slides here. So that's what we have in place here. I just want to bring up to you briefly the book itself and share with you, if I can find it, the one I was speaking of earlier, the test, right? So show you this. There's Skyline Attractions. I am a big fan, by the way, of using a book on your laptop, because it's a lot easier to manipulate in terms of clicking over into websites for these stories. I like to look in the book. So this is Dazita, the rocket ship stretcher. So that was.
Are they like indoor outdoor recreational products?
Yeah. So
I can't tell if they're still around or not.
I don't think they are, but this particular section about them says conservative, moderate, aggressive, and then rocket ship, right? And by the way, we have a couple rocket ships inside the peer group network. It's a lot of fun to support, and work with them on their growth. So there's templates in here, as you can see, for stretch goals. And right now I'm just getting you to the risk test. So these are the risk profiles. So just briefly, you're going to score this and recommend maybe, Charlie, you take out a piece of paper and we do this with you.
Oh,
So,
no, see, I thought it'd be more fun to see what Lauren's risk
all right,
tolerance is.
let's do Lauren's.
She's
So
the recent college graduate. She's
So
going out there and
one-
conquering the world.
so if you
This is
score
like
a question,
40-something.
yeah, exactly. So if you score something at 1, that means you would never do it. If you scored at 3, it means like, let me think about it and I need more information. And then if you scored a 5, then it's going to be like, yeah, I can see myself doing that. So to figure
All
out
right,
your
we'll
tolerances-
both do it and then we'll figure out
right.
where we're at. This will be a good exercise. I like this.
So again, 1's low, 5's high, do something between 1 and 5. Providing a personal guarantee, you're able to obtain a larger credit facility. That means more money, a lower interest rate, or generally favorable terms. So the comment here is, would you be willing to give a personal guarantee, which puts you at risk on your personal assets, in exchange for a more lucrative amount of money and or favorable terms? So on a scale of 1 to 5, where would you be? And I'm going to score alongside you here.
And one was no, you
1
wouldn't.
was low, like, yeah, no, I don't care about personal guarantee. I don't want to ever give a personal guarantee. So that would
Okay,
be
I got
1. And 5 would be like, I don't care. Go ahead. Give a personal guarantee. So number 2 is your business is doing well. It is growing organically each year. You have a solid management team, cash flow, blah, blah, blah. You're faced with the opportunity to expand, but do not need to. However, the money is available. Do you expand? So this is opportunistic growth. It comes to you. If you're not willing to deviate and just want to stay with what you're doing, you're a 1. If you're considerate, you're a 3. If you're totally in because it's an opportunistic thing, that looks great, right? So would you do the expansion? So you want to score that 1 to 5. So
key in that one is you have a solid management team in place. That makes a huge difference.
Yeah, that's a key one, right?
Right, especially now.
So if your business is growing faster than your current lender can fund, you have the option of replacing this bank with a higher interest accounts receivable factor. Okay, so what that essentially is saying, for those of you not aware of what that is you would basically be able to move to more money coming at you, but in exchange for that,
Are you like selling off your AR, basically?
Yeah, correct. So do you replace the conventional financing with a higher rate factor, understanding that otherwise you will have to slow down your growth? So in other words, this is keeping you at your current pace. If you don't decide to do this, you will not grow as fast. So this has to do with, oh my gosh, we have to buy inventory. We have to add additional staff. We need to, to maintain this. So it's kind of saying like, hey, you may have a great plan and you're making your plan happen, but this bank's not following you. So you have to kind of give up more to get a bigger bank, which we see this all the time with the peer groups, by the way, on their equipment, right? So give that a score. And then number 4, are you willing to provide additional collateral in order to obtain the most appropriate funding structure for your business? So on this one, you may have collateralized something. It might be your house, but you may not have collateralized all your assets. Would you be willing to stretch and put some other assets at risk in order to get the funding that you would want for your business? So a little
is this
bit of
getting into maybe you're having to put the property up or something like that?
Correct. Like you'd be giving
Like
up
the
the
real
first
estate?
position on something. Let's say you inherited property, or you have something of value that's you don't owe any money on, and now it's kind of like the personal guarantee question, right? Number one.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting one. I kind of feel a little differently about that.
I was
right?
going to say
So,
that one gets a little bit trickier.
yeah, because it's, you have to look at it from your own personal perspective.
Yeah.
So number 5, the last question, you're facing a choice of paths for your company's future, which can happen to early stage companies, right? Facing a significant change. Your options are to address the issue by narrowed down to 2 choices. 1, you take on a partner, sell a percentage of your company. Or 2, you just take on more debt or use the debt. If you bring in a new equity partner, it may improve your liquidity and resolve that point, but now you're married to a new partner in the future, right? That person's along for the ride. It goes back to the last chapter of the book, which is how does this thing work when it comes to family business and or partnerships? I had businesses early on with a partner that was 20 years older than me, and he was risk averse. So we were constantly in a position where we were pushing each other back and forth about whether we should take on more debt or not, right? So now in the case of you not taking on an equity partner, you would take on more debt, which is higher risk. And in some cases, the cost might be higher, which again, higher risk, right? So better control for you, but a little bit higher risk. So you see people who are older will have a tendency to lower their risk and maybe take on an equity partner, if that's what it is. So
yeah, that might be buying them out in 5 years.
if you're going with equity, you would give yourself a 1. And if you're someone who's going to take on the debt, you would give yourself a 5. So then you take all that into consideration on those 5 questions and you add them all up and you say, okay, where do you stand on your risk? So you should be able to add yours up and get the score. So let's just see, what did you have, Charlie?
So I'm 21 risk
21.
flexible.
What did you
So
have?
I had on the first question, I had 5. On the second one, I had 5 mainly because the management team was in place. 3 and 4, I had 3. And then on the last one, I had 5.
Okay. Lauren, what did you have?
I had 17.
17.
So
Okay.
right there in the middle.
Yeah, I did 3, 5, 3, 1, and then 5.
Wow. Well, can you guys guess what my score is?
27.
Surprisingly, my score came out 11.
No, really?
Yes. So I'm risk averse. So I would say up until
Well,
this
you're
year,
risk averse. This is looking at it from a financing perspective.
sure. Yeah, that's the point, right? It's using debt versus using equity or sucking it up and having organic growth.
Yeah.
So with regard to peer groups, I feel like we've had 3 years of massive growth. And so now to maintain that growth, I've got to make a choice.
Yeah.
Do I want to continue to follow that path and take on debt or use debt? Or do I want to, possibly sell a piece of the company and get that equity and take my risk down?
Yeah.
So I think that's part of what's happening with that scoring. It definitely shows, and I would also say it's with respect to age. You'll see people who are getting closer to retirement age will have a tendency to be more risk averse, both in their personal investment life as well as in their business life.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and I think part of it also is just coming from the rental industry, like debt and the bank, like that was the nature of the beast. Like that's just what it was. It wasn't like you were, paying for it with cash flow. You were always going to the bank. So
I would also
you kind of got used to it.
I would also suggest that, we know that Ami works with the SBA. The SBA as a lending mechanism is different than a bank because it's federally backed. So that means that when you take money in that form from the SBA, it's 50% underwritten by the government and 50% handled by a bank. So because of that, it's less risky for the bank, and in some cases means less there's less of a need to kill you with a higher interest rate. So SBA loans may have better terms than other bank loans. And so that's also part of this conversation to say, hey, you may not want to work with a local bank, but you might want to consider what the SBA has available.
Yeah.
Especially since they've gotten more creative than ever, right? SBA is doing so many different things. We're seeing people buying out their parents with SBA loans. We're seeing people expanding their business through M&A activity with SBA loans. So anyone that sees this, has any interest, be in touch with us. Here's our email, dcrowley@Peer Executive Groups. Be glad to connect you with Ami at any point, but by all means, read the book, The Growth Dilemma. Awesome, good book to read. And Lauren, thank you for putting this all together. And join us next quarter as we do yet another book for our book club.
Good job, Dan.
Yep, thanks, guys. Pause recording.